The day she called me a burden was the day something inside me quietly shifted. I didn't argue with her, and I didn't raise my voice. I simply smiled, poured my tea, and reminded myself that she had no idea what I had already done. Hello, my name is Lucille. I've lived in the same house for more than 50 years, and every wall in it carries my history. Before I tell you the full story, I'd love to know where you're watching from. Share your city in the comments. It always warms me to see how far these stories travel. Now, let me begin. I wasn't born in this house, but it became the only true home I've ever known. My late husband Charles and I moved into it just after our wedding, when it was still a little crooked around the edges. The floors creaked, the paint peeled, and the garden was a tangle of weeds. But to me, it was perfect. Every paycheck we brought home, a little more went into fixing it up. Charles laid the bricks for the front walk himself, whistling all the while. I stitched the curtains by hand, even though the stitches were crooked in places. And when our son, Michael, came along, that house became the cradle of his childhood. Life was simple back then, and maybe that's why it shines so bright in memory. I worked in the library, Charles at the mill, and every evening we'd meet back on the porch. We had mismatched rocking chairs, one of them missing an armrest, and we'd sip sweet tea while the sun dipped behind the trees. Michael would run in circles chasing fireflies, his laughter carrying across the yard. That porch wasn't just wood and nails, it was the stage for our life together. As the years rolled on, the house grew with us. We refinished the kitchen cabinets the year Michael turned 10, painted the upstairs bedroom when he left for college, patched the roof during one especially stormy spring. It wasn't always easy. Sometimes Charles and I bickered over money. Sometimes I worried about bills. Sometimes I thought we'd never have enough to stay afloat. But the house stood, and so did we. When Charles passed away, far too young, the house became both my anchor and my burden. I kept his tools in the shed exactly where he left them, his coffee mug on the second shelf of the cabinet. I couldn't bear to move them. They were reminders, painful and comforting at the same time. It was in that house that I nursed my grief, learning slowly how to carry on. And it was there that I watched Michael grow into a man, bring home his bride, and eventually move out to start a family of his own. The neighborhood changed around me. Families came and went, stores opened and closed, children grew up and left, but I remained. My mornings always began the same. Rise at 6, fill the kettle, tend to the violets on the windowsill. The chipped blue mug Charles once teased me for still held my coffee every single day. I knew people thought I was set in my ways, but those small habits were threads of memory, weaving Charles into my daily life even though he was gone. To me, that house wasn't just shelter. It was a scrapbook made of wood, brick, and glass. So when Michael's wife started making remarks about how big the place was for just one old woman, about how hard it must be for me to manage alone, I felt a prickle of warning. I'd seen that look before, the one people get when they start measuring a place, not as a home, but as property. At first I brushed it off. Maybe she meant well. Maybe she thought she was helping. I tried not to let the comments settle too deep in my heart. After all, she was family. Or so I told myself. But deep down, I knew. I could feel the shift, the way her eyes lingered on the house longer than on me. Still, I didn't speak of it. I went about my days, clipping roses in the garden, baking pies for church events, rocking gently on the porch in the evenings. On the surface, everything looked the same, but underneath, the ground was beginning to move. You see, when someone calls you a burden, they're not just insulting you. They're testing your place, nudging at the idea of whether you still belong. And I had spent too many years pouring my soul into that home to let anyone decide for me that I didn't. So I stayed quiet. I listened, I observed, and when the moment came, I made a decision that would change everything. What she didn't know, and what I hadn't yet revealed, was that the house she thought she could claim had already been secured. And that's where the story truly begins. Looking back, I realized the warning signs had been there all along. They weren't loud, not at first. They crept in like a draft under the door, subtle, almost easy to dismiss. But when you've lived as long as I have, you learn that whispers often grow into shouts if you ignore them long enough. The first time my daughter-in-law, Rachel, made me pause was on a Sunday afternoon. Michael had invited me to their house for dinner. I baked my apple pie, the same recipe he'd loved since childhood, and carried it over still warm from the oven. Rachel greeted me at the door with a smile that looked more rehearsed than real. "Oh, Mrs. Howard, you really didn't have to bring anything," she said, taking the pie from my hands. "We're not really dessert people." She set it on the counter without even looking at it. My son noticed, I could tell. He kissed my cheek and whispered, "Thanks, Mom," in a way that tried to make up for her coolness. Still, I sat through the meal feeling like an unwanted guest in a place where I should have been family. It wasn't just the pie. Little by little, I began to notice how she talked about me when she thought I wasn't listening. At family gatherings, when the neighbors dropped by, she'd slip comments into conversation. Lucille still insists on gardening, even though the yard is too much for her. She doesn't really drive at night anymore. We worry she's lonely in that big old house. On the surface, those words might have sounded like concern, but the tone, the quick glance at her friends, the faint smirk, turned them into something else entirely. It wasn't worry. It was dismissal. Michael, bless him, tried to smooth things over. Whenever Rachel's voice sharpened toward me, he'd change the subject or crack a small joke. He hated conflict. Even as a child, he'd rather run and hide than fight. I used to think it was sweet, that gentle heart of his. But now, as a man, it left him powerless in his own marriage. I never told him how much those small remarks stung. He already lived caught between two women, his wife and his mother, and I refused to put him in the middle any more than life already had. Instead, I smiled politely, thanked Rachel for dinner, and went home to the silence of my own kitchen. But silence doesn't erase the words you've already heard. The breaking point came one afternoon when Rachel had a few friends over. I had dropped by unannounced, something I rarely did, because I'd found a set of old photographs of Michael as a boy. I thought he might enjoy seeing them again. As I stepped onto their porch, I heard laughter from inside. Then Rachel's voice, clear as day. "She's just a burden." Honestly. Michael feels sorry for her. That's the only reason we haven't told her it's time to move. The house she's clinging to is too much for her. One bad fall and she'll expect us to pick up the pieces. Her friends chuckled in agreement. One even said, "That generation just doesn't know when to let go." I stood frozen, the photographs pressed against my chest. My hand hovered over the doorknob, but I didn't go in, not right away. I waited until the laughter died down, until I could wipe the sting from my eyes and fix a small, polite smile on my face. Then I knocked gently and stepped inside as if I hadn't heard a thing. "Rachel," I said softly, holding out the envelope. "I found some old pictures of Michael you might like." The look on her face told me she knew I had heard every word. Her friends shifted uncomfortably, murmuring excuses to leave, but Rachel only plastered on that same brittle smile. "Oh, how thoughtful," she said, taking the envelope. "We'll look at these later." I stayed only a few minutes before excusing myself. My son never knew what I'd overheard that day. At least, not then. That night, I sat in my living room staring at the photographs I'd kept for myself. Michael's gap-toothed grin, his first day of school, him on Charles's shoulders at the fair, a lifetime of love captured in fading colors, and now his wife thought of me as nothing more than dead weight. It would have been easy to lash out, to demand respect, to shout back that I had worked my hands raw to build the life they now enjoyed. But shouting had never been my way. Quiet determination, yes. Careful planning, yes. But not shouting. So I let her words settle deep, not as wounds, but as reminders. Reminders that I would need to protect myself. Reminders that the world sees older women as disposable, unless we prove otherwise. and I had no intention of being disposable. I didn't know it yet, but that overheard insult would be the spark that lit the fuse. The days ahead would test me in ways I never imagined, but that night, as I set the photographs aside and poured myself a cup of tea, I whispered a promise into the silence. You may think I'm a burden, Rachel, but you'll learn soon enough that I am anything but. Rachel's whispers had been sharp enough, but soon she stopped hiding them. There comes a point when people who think they hold power no longer bother with subtlety. For Rachel, that point came one holiday evening when our family was gathered around my dining table. It was Thanksgiving. I'd spent the morning basting the turkey, mashing the potatoes, and setting the table with the embroidered cloth Charles and I had bought on our 10th anniversary. I wanted it to feel warm, a place where laughter and love could linger even after the plates were cleared. Michael helped carve the turkey. Rachel poured wine, her bangles jingling with each movement. The grandchildren, her two little ones, squabbled over dinner rolls, and I smiled to myself, remembering when Michael used to do the same. For a while, it almost felt like old times. Then Rachel cleared her throat and tapped her glass. Everyone, she said with that little air of importance she always carried, I think it's time we talked about something serious. The table quieted. Michael glanced at her nervously, sensing the storm. Rachel continued, This house, it's just too much for Mom to manage alone. Don't you think? She turned her gaze on me, sweetly sharp. We've all seen how hard it is for you, Lucille. I set down my fork. I manage fine, I said gently. The garden keeps me busy, yes, but I enjoy it. The repairs... She cut me off. Be honest. You fell last month in the yard. Michael told me Michael flushed, his eyes darting to mine. It wasn't, he began, but Rachel waved him silent. And the bills, she pressed on. Utilities for a house this size? The upkeep? It's wasteful, really, when you could be somewhere smaller, safer. A retirement community, perhaps. You'd have people to talk to, activities, nurses nearby if something happened. The words, wasteful and retirement community, hung in the air like sour smoke. I looked around the table. The grandchildren stared at their plates, sensing tension. Michael avoided my eyes. I wanted him to speak, to tell her this was neither the time nor the place, but silence can be louder than words. His silence told me everything I needed to know. He wouldn't stop her. So I steadied my breath and said, Rachel, I appreciate your concern, but this is my home. I built my life here. I'm not ready to leave it behind. She smiled tightly, her voice turning cold. Sometimes it's not about what you want, Lucille. It's about what makes sense for the family. Her words landed like a stone in my chest. For the family, as if I weren't part of it. I didn't argue further. I served pie, poured coffee, kept the conversation moving. But the warmth I'd hoped for was gone, smothered under her declaration. When they left that evening, Michael hugged me a little too tightly, as if apologizing without words. Rachel didn't hug me at all. She simply picked up the children's coats, said, We'll talk again soon, and swept out the door. Talk again we did. The weeks that followed turned Rachel's hints into commands. She began dropping by unannounced, clipboard in hand, as if she were already planning renovations. You'll never get a good price with this wallpaper, she said once, running her fingers along the floral print Charles and I had chosen together. Buyers like something modern, neutral. Another time, she clucked at the creaky stairs. These are a hazard, Lucille. Imagine if you broke a hip. Then what? Michael would have to put his life on hold to take care of you. Each jab carried the same message. You don't belong here anymore. One Saturday afternoon, she arrived with two of her friends. They strutted through my living room, murmuring about potential and market value, as if I weren't sitting right there in my armchair. Rachel turned to them with a laugh. We'll finally be able to open up this space. Mom doesn't need all this clutter. Just look at those shelves, packed with knickknacks no one's touched in years. Her friends nodded, amused. I folded my hands in my lap and said nothing, though my blood burned. Later, after they left, I sat alone at the table staring at the teacup still warm in my hand. She had stopped pretending. I was no longer family in her eyes, no longer the woman who had raised her husband, the grandmother of her children. To Rachel, I was an obstacle. That was the night I realized this wasn't just about words anymore. She was laying the ground for something larger, something dangerous, and if I didn't act soon, I might find myself out of my own home before I could even catch my breath. So I made a quiet decision. She thought she was preparing her friends for a future where I was gone, but I had already prepared too. The papers were signed, the deed in my name. She just didn't know it yet, and when the time came, that secret would be the stone she tripped over. The evening Rachel paraded her friends through. My home like prospective buyers, I didn't sleep. I lay awake staring at the ceiling, listening to the house creak and sigh the way it always had. But instead of comfort, the sound filled me with dread. I realized then that if I didn't secure myself, I could wake one morning to find strangers measuring my curtains and scribbling numbers on clipboards. Rachel wouldn't stop. She had the energy of a woman who thought she was destined to win. So the next morning, I did something I hadn't done in years. I called my lawyer. His name was David Turner. He'd been practicing longer than Rachel had been alive, and though his hair had gone silver, his mind was still sharp as a tack. I hadn't spoken to him since Charles's passing, when he'd helped me navigate the estate paperwork. When I called, his warm voice answered, "Mrs. Howard, it's been too long. How are you managing?" "I'm all right, David," I said carefully, "but I think I might need your help again." We met in his office 2 days later. I wore my navy dress, the one Charles always said made me look dignified. It wasn't vanity, I just wanted Rachel's voice out of my head for a while. David stood as I entered, shaking my hand firmly. "So, what troubles landed on your doorstep?" I explained everything. Rachel's comments, her visits with friends, her insistence that I move. I told him how Michael stayed silent, too caught in the middle to protect me. David listened quietly, his pen scratching notes across yellow paper. Finally, he set the pen down. "Lucille," he said, "let's clarify something right now. Whose name is on the deed?" "My late husband's," I admitted. "Charles never updated it before he passed. It's always been listed under both of us, but I never filed anything to confirm sole ownership." David leaned back, eyebrows raised. "That means technically your name is there, but depending on interpretation, someone might argue it's part of Michael's inheritance. And if Rachel ever tried to push things legally, it could get messy." My stomach tightened. "So what do we do?" He smiled faintly. "We make it impossible for her to touch. You're still alive and well, fully competent. That means you can file to have the deed transferred into your sole name. Clean, simple, airtight." I exhaled, tension easing from my shoulders. "And Rachel can't contest it?" "She can try," David said, chuckling, "but she'll fail. Property law is very clear. This is your home until the day you decide otherwise. And if you never decide otherwise, then it remains yours." We spent the next hour going over documents. I signed where he pointed, my hand steady. For years, I'd signed papers without really thinking about them. Bills, taxes, letters. But this time, each stroke of the pen felt like armor sliding into place. When we finished, David looked me in the eye. "Keep this quiet. Don't mention it to your son. Not yet. And certainly not to your daughter-in-law. Let them think the house is still vulnerable. When the time comes, and believe me, it will, you'll have the element of surprise." I nodded. "Thank you, David. I can't tell you what a relief this is. You don't need to," he said, smiling kindly. "But remember, Lucille, you're not helpless. People forget that age doesn't erase rights. If Rachel wants to test you, she'll learn the hard way." That night, back at home, I set the papers in Charles's old desk drawer and locked it. Then I brewed a cup of chamomile tea and sat in my rocking chair, listening to the quiet tick of the clock. Rachel thought she was clever, circling like a hawk, but she didn't realize the prey she was after had claws of her own. I didn't feel triumphant, not yet. What I felt was steady. safe, for the first time in months. Still, part of me mourned. I'd never wanted to treat family like adversaries. When Michael married Rachel, I had hoped for warmth, for Sunday dinners filled with laughter. I had imagined teaching her my recipes, showing her how to prune the roses, telling stories about Charles over pie. Instead, she saw me as clutter, as something to sweep out of her path, and that hurt more than I cared to admit. But pain has a way of shaping resolve. That night, as the violets on the windowsill caught the glow of the streetlight, I whispered to Charles, "I've protected what we built. She won't take it from us." And in the quiet of my home, I almost thought I felt his approval, like a hand resting steady on my shoulder. The weeks that followed the deed transfer felt like living in two separate worlds. Inside my house, I felt secure again. Papers tucked neatly in Charles's old desk, the law standing firmly on my side. But outside, in the space where Rachel's voice carried, I was still painted as the fragile old woman who needed to be moved along like an expired carton of milk. Rachel didn't back down. If anything, she pressed harder. She began dropping phrases into conversation whenever Michael and I were in the same room, small jabs meant to wear me thin. "Mom, don't you get tired climbing those stairs every night?" Michael and I worry. Or, "That garden is far too much work for one person. You should be resting, not dragging hoses around, always with a smile, always framed as concern." But the steel underneath was unmistakable. Michael would rub the back of his neck and mutter something vague like, "She's just trying to help, Mom." But I knew better. Help wasn't what Rachel had in mind. One Saturday, she showed up with glossy brochures. I found her already sitting in my kitchen, flipping through them with a bright expression. "Look, Lucille," she said, spreading them out on the table. "Shady Pines, Golden, Oaks, Whispering Meadows. They're all lovely places, safe, clean, with people your age. You'd have activities every day and no more worrying about mowing lawns or fixing leaky faucets." I looked at the brochures, all filled with smiling gray-haired couples tossing beanbags or holding hands on manicured walking trails. The pictures were nice, but they weren't my life. "I appreciate your research," I said calmly, sliding them back toward her. "But I'm not moving." Her smile thinned. "Lucille, you can't live alone forever. What if something happens? What if you fall? Michael and I have children to think about." Her words landed like blows, not because they were true, but because they carried the accusation beneath them. "You're inconvenient. You're in the way." Another time, she came through the front door without knocking, waving her phone in my face. "I've been tracking property values," she announced, her tone bright. "Do you know your house could sell for nearly double what you bought it for? Think of all the opportunities that would open up for the family." "The family," she said, "not you." I folded the dish towel in my hands and answered evenly, "This house isn't on the market." Her eyes flickered, a quick flash of irritation before she pasted on her smile again. "Oh, we'll see. Sometimes change is for the best." Michael stayed quiet through most of this. He came by on weekends, played with the children in the yard, helped me haul in groceries. But the moment Rachel appeared, his voice shrank. It pained me to watch him, a grown man, my son, buckle under her sharpness. One evening, after she'd gone out to the car with the kids, I pulled him aside. "Michael," I said softly, "you know I'm not helpless, don't you?" He sighed, running a hand through his hair. "Of course, Mom." But Rachel worries. She thinks she's doing what's best. I looked at him, my boy with lines at the corners of his eyes now, older than Charles ever got to be. I saw the weight on his shoulders, the tug-of-war between loyalty to his wife and to me. And I realized, maybe for the first time, that I couldn't expect him to shield me. He wasn't built for confrontation. If I wanted to stand, I'd have to do it myself. The final straw came one Sunday afternoon. Rachel stood in my living room, her arms crossed, surveying the space like a queen assessing her domain. "Lucille," she said bluntly, "this isn't working anymore. You can't keep up this charade. You need to move." Michael and I have discussed it, and we've decided it's time. The house is too big, too old, too much. My pulse quickened, but my voice remained steady. Rachel, I've told you before, I'm not leaving my home. Her eyes narrowed. We'll see about that. That night, I sat on the porch with my tea, the autumn air sharp, against my cheeks. Rachel thought she was cornering me, thought her pressure would break me down. But every push only hardened my resolve. She didn't know the truth yet, and I wasn't going to reveal it until she forced my hand. What she called pressure, I called preparation. And soon enough, her determination to oust me would deliver her straight into her own undoing. It was a Thursday afternoon when Rachel made her boldest play yet. I was in the kitchen kneading dough for bread, the scent of yeast filling the air when the doorbell rang. Wiping my hands on a towel, I opened the door, and there she was, standing with a tall man in a gray suit, carrying a leather folder. "This is Mr. Collins," she said briskly, pushing past me before I could respond. "He's a real estate agent." He's going to take a quick look around. For a moment, I stood frozen. The audacity of it nearly stole my breath. My own daughter-in-law striding into my living room with a stranger in tow, as if she owned the place. Mr. Collins cleared his throat politely, but his eyes flicked around with the sharp appraisal of a man who'd walked into hundreds of homes. "It's a lovely property, Mrs. Howard," he said. "Big yard, solid structure. Buyers love these older homes with character." I forced a smile, though my jaw ached with restraint. "How kind of you to say. Would you like some tea while you work?" Rachel shot me a look of disbelief, clearly expecting me to shout or throw them out, but I wouldn't give her the satisfaction. They walked through the house as I followed quietly behind, hands folded in front of me. "The kitchen could use updating," Collins muttered, jotting notes. "These cabinets are original, aren't they?" Rachel added with a little laugh. "Mom insists they're still fine, but buyers expect stainless steel now." Upstairs, he peered into bedrooms, measuring with his eyes. Plenty of natural light. You could easily market this as a 4-bedroom family home. Rachel nodded eagerly, as if he were handing her a prize. Exactly what I've been saying. Too much space for one person. I trailed behind them, my face calm, though inside I was trembling, not with fear, but with anger. Every shelf they dismissed, every photo they glanced past, every piece of furniture they called dated was a chapter of my life with Charles, with Michael, with all the years that had made me who I am. Finally, in the living room, Mr. Collins turned to Rachel. "I'd like to review the title deed before we move forward." "Do you have the paperwork on hand?" Rachel smiled confidently. "Yes, it's in my husband's name." "I'll get it to you." That was my moment. I set down the teacups I'd been carrying and said softly, "Actually, Mr. Collins, the deed is in my name." Solely, the room went still. Rachel's smile faltered, her face draining of color. "What?" I held his gaze, calm as the violets on my windowsill. "I updated the documents with my lawyer weeks ago. The house is mine. There is no sale without my signature, South." For a heartbeat, the silence stretched. Then Collins cleared his throat. "Ah, well, in that case, Mrs. Howard, I'll take my leave. I'm sorry for the intrusion." He gathered his papers quickly, avoiding Rachel's furious eyes, and made for the door. Rachel spun on me the moment he was gone. "You went behind our backs," she hissed. "No, Rachel," I said evenly. "I went behind yours. Michael doesn't need to be dragged into this. This is my home, and I've made sure it stays that way." Her face twisted, rage and disbelief mingling into something ugly. "You selfish old woman. You'd rather rot alone than let your family use this house properly?" "My family," I said firmly, "doesn't scheme to take what isn't theirs. You've made your intentions clear. And now, so have I." She stormed out without another word, slamming the door so hard the windows rattled. For a long while I stood in the silence, my heart pounding. My hands trembled slightly as I gathered the untouched teacups, but not from fear, from release. The cards were on the table now. Rachel knew. The war she thought she was winning had just shifted ground. That night, I sat at Charles's old desk and opened the drawer where the deed rested safely. I traced the edges of the paper with my fingertips, remembering his laugh, his strength, the way he used to say, "You're tougher than you look, Lucille." He'd been right. Rachel thought she could bulldoze me with arrogance, but she had underestimated the quiet power of preparation. And while I had won this round, I knew it was only the beginning. She wouldn't stop. Not yet. The real question was, how far would she go next? I didn't have to wait long to find out. I thought Rachel might cool down after the embarrassment with the realtor, but if anything, it only sharpened her edge. Some people, when confronted with truth, soften. Rachel wasn't one of them. She treated truth like a wall to be battered down until it cracked. It happened on a rainy Sunday evening. Michael and Rachel had come for dinner. I had roasted a chicken, baked biscuits, even made peach cobbler for dessert, an effort to remind us all of better times. For most of the meal, Rachel said little, stabbing her fork at her food as if it had personally offended her. When the plates were cleared, she folded her hands and fixed me with a look that could cut glass. "Lucille," she said, "this can't go on." I set down the coffee pot. "What do you mean?" She leaned forward. "You living here alone. It isn't safe. It isn't practical. And frankly, it isn't fair to the rest of us. Michael and I have talked it over. We've decided it's time you moved out." The words dropped heavy as thunder. Michael shifted uneasily beside her. "Rachel..." She held up a hand. "No, Michael. We've danced around this long enough. Your mother needs to hear the truth." I studied her face. Smooth, unflinching, convinced she was righteous. Then I looked at my son. His eyes wouldn't meet mine. He stared at his hands like a boy caught cheating on a test. I wanted him to defend me, to tell her this was madness. But the silence stretched, and I realized he wouldn't. I drew a breath, steadying my voice. "Rachel, I've told you before. This is my home." I'm not leaving. Her lips curled in a small, cold smile. "You think you can just dig in your heels and stop us? We'll find a way. If you won't go willingly, we'll make arrangements." I raised an eyebrow. Arrangements? Retirement facilities, legal proceedings, guardianship. She rattled off, her tone clipped. "You can't hold on forever. We're doing what's best for you and for this family." There it was again, for the family, as if stripping me from my home like a weed was some noble sacrifice. I set my hands flat on the table. "Rachel," I said calmly, "you mistake kindness for weakness. I've let you speak your piece, but don't confuse patience with surrender. I am not leaving my home." Her smile vanished. "You're being unreasonable." "And you," I replied, "are being cruel." The air grew taut as wire. Michael finally looked up, his face pale. "Please," he murmured, "can we not fight like this?" But it was too late. The fight had already begun, and no amount of shrinking could make it disappear. Rachel pushed back her chair, the legs scraping harshly against the floor. "Fine. If you want to play stubborn, go ahead. But don't say we didn't warn you." She snatched her purse from the chair and stormed toward the door. Michael lingered, torn in two. He kissed my cheek quickly, whispering, "I'm sorry," before hurrying after her. When the house was quiet again, I poured myself a cup of coffee and sat at the table alone. The storm outside lashed against the windows, thunder rolling low. My hands trembled, not with fear, but with the weight of finality. Rachel had spoken her ultimatum. She wanted me gone, and she would stop at nothing to get her way. But she didn't know what I held. In the drawer of Charles's desk, the deed rested under lock and key. The law was on my side, and if Rachel truly tried to force my hand, she would find herself on the losing end of a battle she thought she controlled. Later that night, as I watered the violets on the windowsill, I whispered to Charles, "It's coming to a head, love. She thinks I'm cornered, but I'm ready." The leaves rustled softly as the storm rattled the glass. almost as if he were answering me. It's one thing to fight with whispers and glances. It's another to speak the threat aloud. Rachel had crossed that line, and when she tried to push me out, she would learn that crossing lines has consequences. I didn't have to wait long for Rachel to act on her ultimatum. Less than a week later, she came knocking, not with a smile or a casserole dish, but with anger in her eyes and determination in her step, and she didn't come alone. It was a Saturday morning. I was folding laundry in the living room when I heard the sound of a key rattling in the front door. My stomach tightened. Only 2 people had keys besides me, Michael and Rachel. The door swung open, and in she came, children in tow. She wasn't even surprised to find me home. Instead, she waved the kids toward the sofa and said briskly, "Start packing your things, Lucille. The movers will be here in an hour." My heart slammed against my ribs. Movers? She smiled, but there was no warmth in it. Yes, Michael and I agreed it's time. We've arranged a unit at Golden Oaks. Everything is handled. I stood frozen, laundry still clutched in my hands. "Rachel," I said quietly, "this is my home. You don't have the right." Her voice rose, sharp and cutting. "You're too stubborn to see what's best for everyone. So we're taking care of it for you." The children shrank into the sofa cushions, wide-eyed. My pulse hammered, but my voice stayed calm. "You'll do no such thing." Rachel's smile turned smug. "Watch me." She pulled out her phone and began barking instructions into it. "Yes, bring the truck to the side entrance. Boxes first. The bedroom furniture goes. The rest can be sorted later." I set the laundry down, my hands steady now. Without a word, I walked to the desk in the corner, picked up the landline, and dialed. 911, what's your emergency? "Yes," I said calmly. "This is Lucille Howard. My daughter-in-law has entered my home without permission and is attempting to remove me against my will. I need officers here immediately." Rachel's face drained of color. "You wouldn't." I met her eyes, unflinching. "Watch me." The officers arrived 15 minutes later, their blue lights flashing across the curtains. Rachel greeted them with a flurry of words, painting herself as the concerned caregiver. "She's old. She's not thinking straight. She's putting herself in danger," she insisted. "This house is too much for her. We're moving her somewhere safe." One officer held up a hand. "Ma'am, let's see some ID and proof of ownership." Rachel blinked. "It's in my husband's name." I stepped forward, pulling the deed from the folder I had prepared weeks ago. "No," I said, handing it over. "It's in mine." The officer scanned the document, his expression firming. "Mrs. Howard is the legal owner. You have no authority." Here, Rachel's mouth opened and closed, like a fish gasping on the dock. "But she can't—" The officer's voice turned sharp. "If you attempt to remove her again, you'll be facing charges." "Do you understand?" The children burst into tears, frightened by the stern voices. Michael arrived just in time to see the officers standing in his mother's living room. He looked from Rachel's flushed face to mine, confusion written all over him. "What's going on?" he asked, his voice trembling. Rachel rounded on him. "Your mother called the police on me." Michael turned to me. "Mom?" I held his gaze. "She tried to force me out." I reminded her whose name is on the deed. The silence that followed was heavy, broken only by the officer's clipped explanation. "Sir, your mother is the sole legal owner of this property. Your wife has no authority to remove her." Michael's face paled. His mouth opened, then closed again, as if he wanted to speak but couldn't find the words. When the officers left, warning Rachel to stay away unless invited, the house fell into uneasy silence. Rachel gathered the children roughly, her face blotched with fury. "This isn't over," she spat, her voice trembling with rage. "You think you've won, but you haven't." She stormed out, slamming the door so hard the dishes in the cupboard rattled. Michael lingered, shame written across his face. "Mom," he whispered, "I didn't know she was doing this." "I swear I didn't." I nodded slowly. "I believe you, Michael. But believing you doesn't make this any less painful." He lowered his head, then followed his wife out into the rain. That night, as the storm passed and the house settled back into its quiet rhythm, I sat in Charles's old armchair. My heart still pounded from the confrontation, but beneath the adrenaline was something steadier. Relief. For the first time, the balance of power had shifted in plain sight. Rachel's mask of control had cracked in front of everyone, officers, children, even Michael. She wanted me gone. But now she knew she couldn't sweep me aside like dust. The battle wasn't over, but the first victory was mine. News spreads quickly in a small town, faster than weeds after a rainstorm. By Monday morning, it seemed half the neighborhood had heard about Rachel trying to throw me out and the police escorting her off my porch. Mrs. Jenkins, my neighbor across the street, stopped by with a basket of muffins. "Lucille," she said, her eyes wide with sympathy. "I just couldn't believe it when I heard. Your own daughter-in-law behaving like that." She shook her head. Shameful. Just shameful. I forced a smile and thanked her, though my stomach nodded. I hadn't asked for gossip, but gossip had arrived anyway. I could already imagine Rachel's humiliation when her friends whispered behind her, back at the grocery store, shaking their heads. She had strutted so proudly, certain she held the upper hand. Now the whole town knew she'd been wrong, and in some ways I pitied her, but only in some ways. Michael came by 2 days later, alone. He looked tired, as though the weight of the world had been piled on his shoulders. "Mom," he began softly, standing in the doorway like a boy caught sneaking in after curfew. "I wanted to apologize for all of it. Rachel." She went too far. I folded my hands. "Too far? Michael," she tried to put me out on the street, "that isn't a slip of judgment. That's cruelty." He flinched, but nodded. "I know." "She's embarrassed now. People are talking. She says you've ruined her reputation." A bitter laugh escaped me before I could stop it. I ruined her reputation. She did that herself. Michael sat down heavily on the sofa. "She says she was only trying to protect us, that the house is too much for you, and—" "Michael!" My voice was sharper than I intended. He stopped mid-sentence. "I've lived in this house for more than 50 years. I've raised you in it, buried my husband from it, and kept it standing with my own 2 hands. Don't you dare let her paint me as some helpless woman too fragile to carry her own life." His face reddened. "I didn't mean—" I softened, sighing. "I know you didn't. But she did. And if you let her words shape your view of me, you'll lose sight of the truth." He dropped his gaze to the floor. "She told me the other night that if I didn't take her side, I was choosing you over her. And if I chose you, she'd leave." The confession sliced through me. My boy caught between his mother and his wife, forced to pick sides in a war he never wanted. "What did you tell her?" I asked quietly. He rubbed his temples. I didn't answer. I couldn't. I wanted to reach out, to hold his hand like I did when he was little, to tell him everything would be all right. But I couldn't lie, because nothing about this was all right. The shame didn't only cling to Rachel, it clung to Michael too. At the hardware store, people whispered about how he let his wife treat his own mother. At church, some of the women pulled me aside to say, "We always knew she was trouble." I smiled politely, but inside I ached. I never wanted my son's marriage dragged through the mud. And yet, here we were. Rachel, for her part, kept her distance. Weeks passed without a single knock on my door from her. But absence didn't mean surrender. No, silence was her weapon now, a cold wall between us that left Michael shuttling back and forth like a man living 2 lives. I could see the strain on him, but I also knew this wasn't my fight to ease. He had chosen his path when he married her. All I could do was hold my ground and protect what was mine. One evening, as the sun dipped low, Mrs. Jenkins came by again. She lowered her voice as she handed me a casserole dish. "Lucille, I heard Rachel's been telling folks you're unstable, that you called the police because you're paranoid." I closed my eyes, letting the words sink in like stones. Of course. When humiliation burns, some people throw dirt to cover their own tracks. "Thank you for telling me," I said, but let her talk. The truth has a way of standing taller than lies. That night, I sat on the porch with my tea, listening to the crickets. Shame is a peculiar thing. It can crush one person flat while pushing another to fight harder. Rachel's shame had turned to venom. Mine had turned to steel. I had faced whispers before, when Charles died and people wondered how I'd manage alone. I'd survived then, and I would now. What Rachel didn't yet understand was that shame, like a storm, passes. But dignity, that's something you guard with your life. And I intended to guard mine fiercely. Michael had always been a gentle soul. Even as a boy, he'd rather back down than fight. I used to think that softness would make him a kind husband, and in many ways it did. But as I watched his shoulders slump under Rachel's shadow, I realized kindness without courage can leave a man hollow. One chilly evening, he came by alone again. He looked worn, his shirt untucked, dark circles beneath his eyes. I invited him in, poured him coffee, and waited. I've learned not to press him. If Michael has something to say, it comes out slow, like sap from a tree. After a long silence, he said quietly, "Mom, I don't know what to do anymore." I sipped my coffee, letting him gather his words. "She's angry all the time now," he continued, "about the neighbors gossiping, about the police showing up, about how you've made her look. But it's more than that. She keeps bringing up money, the house, inheritance." My chest tightened. What exactly has she said? He rubbed his hands together, avoiding my eyes. She told me flat out she married me knowing this house would one day be ours, that it was part of the future she counted on. And now that you've put the deed in your name, she says I betrayed her. She says I let you cut her off. I closed my eyes for a moment, pain washing through me. So that was it. Not just pride, not just control, greed, my home, my memories, my life, reduced to an asset in Rachel's ledger. "Michael," I said softly, "did you know she thought of the house that way when you married her?" He shook his head. I knew she liked security, but I thought she loved me for me. His voice cracked. Maybe she did at first. I don't know anymore. For a moment, I saw him as a boy again, 10 years old, standing in the doorway after losing a schoolyard fight, lip trembling, ashamed not of losing, but of disappointing me. He leaned forward, voice low. "She's reckless with money, Mom. Credit cards, shopping, vacations we can't afford. I've been covering for her, taking on extra shifts, juggling bills. She swore the house would fix everything, said we could sell it, pay off debt, start fresh." My heart ached for him, caught between love and resentment, a husband and a son both. "And now?" I asked. "Now," he whispered. "She says if I don't make you leave, she'll leave me. Take the kids. File for divorce." The words hung in the air like smoke. Divorce. My son's family splintering because his wife couldn't pry her claws into the home Charles and I built. I reached across the table and took his hand. "Michael, listen to me. You are my son, and I love you more than life itself. But I will not be bullied out of my home, not by Rachel, and not by threats she throws at you. If she truly loves you, she won't measure that love in bricks and dollars. If she doesn't," I sighed, "then she was never the wife you deserved." Tears welled in his eyes, though he blinked them back. "I don't want to lose her. But I can't keep living like this either. She's angry all the time, and He broke off, swallowing hard. "I'm tired, Mom." I squeezed his hand. "You don't have to choose between us, Michael. I've already secured myself. The house is mine. That battle is over. But you have to decide what kind of man you'll be. The kind who lets someone else dictate his life, or the kind who stands." He nodded slowly, though I could see the weight of it pressing on him. When he left that night, I stood at the window watching his car pull away. My heart felt torn. I wanted to protect him, shield him from Rachel's venom, lift every burden from his shoulders the way I did when he was little. But he wasn't a boy anymore. He had to face his own storms. Still, as the taillights disappeared into the darkness, I whispered to Charles, "Our boy is drowning, and I don't know if he knows how to swim." Rachel thought this fight was about me and the house, but more and more I saw it was about something deeper, the grip she had on my son and the lengths she'd go to keep it, and I feared she hadn't shown me the worst of her yet. I thought Rachel might back off once the police made their position clear, but some people don't retreat when the walls close in. They claw harder, desperate to bend reality to their will. Rachel was one of those people. It began with whispers again. Mrs. Jenkins mentioned it first. Her voice hushed as she stood on my porch with a basket of scones. "Lucille," she said, her eyes darting across the street, "Rachel's been saying, well, she's been telling folks you're not in your right mind, that you're forgetful, that you called the police because you got confused." My stomach dropped. "Confused?" She nodded sadly. "She's painting it like you're slipping, like you're unfit." The word landed like a stone. Unfit. That wasn't gossip anymore. That was a weapon. 2 weeks later, I got the letter. A neat white envelope delivered by certified mail with words that chilled me. Petition for guardianship. Rachel had filed a claim in court that I was mentally incompetent to manage my own affairs. If she succeeded, she could gain control not just of my medical decisions, but of my finances and my house. I sat at the kitchen table with the papers spread before me, hands trembling, heart pounding in my ears. It was one thing to endure her insults, another to face her barging into my home. But this was an attack on my very name, my dignity, my identity. For a moment, I felt the sting of panic. What if the court believed her? What if my memories, my independence, were stripped from me with the stroke of a judge's pen? But panic didn't last. Fear has a way of hardening into resolve when you've got something worth fighting for, and I had everything worth fighting for. I called David Turner the next morning. He listened quietly as I read the petition aloud. When I finished, there was a long pause. Then he said, "Lucille, I've seen this trick before. Families turning on their elders, trying to strip them of control. It's ugly. But don't you worry. We'll handle this. What if the judge believes her?" My voice cracked despite myself. David's tone sharpened. "The law requires proof. Medical evaluations, testimony, evidence of negligence. Do you know what you have, Lucille? Neighbors who see you in your garden every day. Friends at church who know you run circles around folks half your age. Doctors who will testify that your mind is sharp. And most importantly, me." I let out a shaky breath. "So we fight?" He chuckled softly. "Oh, we fight." The weeks leading up to the hearing were some of the longest of my life. Rachel strutted around town, acting as though victory was already hers. I caught wind of the things she told people, that I forgot to pay bills, that I left the stove on, that I wandered the neighborhood at night in my robe. Lies. Every last one of them. Some neighbors believed her. Others didn't. But the uncertainty ate at me. Would the judge see me for who I was or for who Rachel painted me to be? Michael came by one evening, his face drawn tight. He held the petition in his hand. "Mom," he whispered, "I didn't know she was doing this until the papers came." I swear I looked into his tired eyes. "And what do you think, Michael? Do you believe I'm unfit?" His face crumpled. "Of course not. You're sharper than both of us. But she won't listen to me anymore. She says if I don't back her, she'll take the kids and leave." My chest ached, seeing my son twisted between loyalty and fear. "Michael," I said softly, "sometimes you can't save someone from themselves. And sometimes the cost of trying is too high." He lowered his gaze. "I don't know what to do." I touched his hand. "You don't have to do anything. This is my fight, and I intend to win it." The night before the hearing, I sat in my rocking chair with Charles's mug in my hands. I whispered to him, as I often did when the world felt too heavy. "They're trying to take away everything, love. Not just the house, my very name, But I won't let them. I won't let her write me out of my own life. The house creaked gently around me, as if in agreement. Rachel thought she had me cornered, thought the law could be bent to her will, but she had underestimated me once again, and in the courtroom, with the eyes of strangers upon us, she was about to learn what strength really looked like. The courthouse smelled faintly of old wood and floor polish, the kind of scent that clung to places where too many secrets had been spoken aloud. I sat on the worn bench outside the courtroom, hands folded neatly in my lap, while David Turner shuffled through his papers beside me. "Remember, Lucille," he said, his voice calm, "you don't need to convince the world. Just the judge. Answer clearly, stay steady, and let Rachel dig her own hole." I nodded, though my heart pounded so loudly I thought it might echo off the marble walls. Rachel arrived in a sharp navy suit, her hair pulled back tight, her lips pressed into a line of false dignity. Michael trailed behind, shoulders sagging, his eyes flicking toward me with guilt. He gave me a faint smile before slipping into his seat. When the judge entered, the room hushed. A gavel struck wood, and the trial began. Rachel's attorney wasted no time. "Your Honor, we're here today because Mrs. Howard is no longer capable of managing her affairs. She lives alone in a large, deteriorating house. She's suffered falls. She has called the police under delusional pretenses. For her safety and the good of her family, guardianship should be granted to her son's wife, Rachel Howard." The words rang out, heavy as accusations of sin. I could feel eyes on me, strangers, neighbors, even the court clerk glancing my way. David rose slowly, calm as a man pouring tea. "Your Honor, those are claims without proof. We intend to show that Mrs. Howard is fully competent, sharp of mind, and perfectly capable of managing her life. We will show that this petition is not about care or concern, but about control and greed." The judge arched a brow. "Proceed." Rachel took the stand first. Her voice quavered with practiced sympathy. "She forgets things, Your Honor. Important things. I've had to remind her about bills, about appointments. She insists on gardening, alone, even though she nearly collapsed last summer. She's stubborn. And when she called the police on me, it broke my heart." She wasn't thinking clearly. David stood, arms folded. "Mrs. Howard, do you have documentation of these so-called lapses? Missed bills, medical records, proof of negligence?" Rachel hesitated, her eyes darting. "Well, no, but anyone can see she's not—" "No further questions," David cut in smoothly. When it was my turn to testify, my knees trembled as I rose. But the moment I placed my hand on the Bible and swore to tell the truth, a strange calm settled over me. David guided me gently. "Mrs. Howard, do you handle your own finances?" "Yes," I said firmly. "I pay every bill on time. I balance my checkbook monthly. I have receipts if you'd like to see them, and your health. I see my doctor regularly. No cognitive decline, no dementia. I still drive, carefully during the day, and I tend to my garden daily. I've had one fall in the yard, which was clumsiness, not incapacity." Murmurs rippled through the room. Then came the witnesses. Mrs. Jenkins testified that she saw me walking every morning, steady and sharp. Pastor Miller told the court I led the church bake sale committee, organizing volunteers and handling funds without issue. My doctor read from her notes. Patient is alert, oriented, and capable of independent living. Each word stacked higher, building a wall Rachel couldn't climb. Finally, David delivered the blow. "Your Honor, here is the deed to Mrs. Howard's property. It is solely in her name. She legally and rightfully secured it after her husband's passing. This petition is not about care. It is about seizing what does not belong to the petitioner." He let the words hang in the air. Rachel's face flushed crimson. The judge leaned back, steepling his fingers. "I've heard enough." He glanced at Rachel, his gaze cool. "This court finds no evidence of incompetence. Petition denied. Furthermore, I caution you, Mrs. Rachel Howard, Guardianship is not a tool for family disputes. If you pursue baseless claims again, you may face penalties." The gavel struck. The sound was final, sharp as a door slamming shut. Relief washed over me so strong my eyes stung. Michael sat slumped in his seat, shame carved deep into his face. Rachel rose stiffly, her mouth pinched tight, and stormed out of the courtroom without a glance in my direction. David patted my hand. "You did well, Lucille." Dignity always stands taller than malice. That night, as I sat in my rocking chair with Charles's mug warm in my hands, I let the quiet sink in. The battle wasn't over, but today, in that courtroom, I had claimed a victory, not just for myself, but for every older soul who's ever been treated as less. Rachel had tried to strip me of my very identity. Instead, she'd only revealed her own. After the courtroom battle, you'd think I would have felt only triumph. And for a time, I did. But triumph can be a lonely thing when it comes at the cost of family. I won, yes. But as I sat that evening in my rocking chair, staring at the quiet violets on the sill, I knew Rachel wouldn't stop. She'd only lick her wounds and plan again. That's when I decided to finally open the drawer Charles had left, locked all those years ago. It wasn't anything dramatic, just an old oak drawer in his desk, the one I'd been too sentimental to sort through fully since his passing. I had the key tucked away, though I'd never used it. That night, I turned it in the lock and pulled the drawer open. Inside were papers yellowed with age, insurance documents, a ledger from the mill, and envelopes with notes in Charles's steady hand. But tucked beneath them all was a folder, marked simply, "For Lucille." My hands trembled as I opened it. Inside were deeds, one to a small rental property we had purchased years ago, another to a modest patch of farmland outside town. Alongside them was a savings account summary, with more tucked away than I had realized. Charles had been careful, planning for a future even I didn't know about. I sat back, breath-catching. All this time, Rachel had circled the house like a vulture, thinking it was the only prize. But she had no idea. I wasn't just secure. I was comfortable. Independent in ways she couldn't imagine. The next day, I went to see David Turner again. I laid the folder on his desk and his brows shot up as he flipped through the papers. "Lucille," he said, smiling, "you've been wealthier than you let on." I chuckled softly. I didn't even know it myself, not fully. Charles was always saving, always tucking something aside. I suppose I didn't realize just how much he'd managed. David leaned back, tapping the folder. "This changes things. You're not just defending yourself, you're standing on a foundation Rachel can't shake. These properties, this account, you're secure. She can't touch any of it." I exhaled, a weight lifting from my chest. Then maybe it's time I stop hiding what I have. Maybe it's time I use it. That evening, I sat at my kitchen table with a cup of tea, staring at the papers spread before me. For months, Rachel had tried to paint me as weak, a burden clinging to an old house. She thought she could shove me into a corner and slam the door. But here, in black and white, was proof that I wasn't fragile. I wasn't even dependent. I had resources, options, and choices that she couldn't control. The thought made me smile. Small but real. The following Sunday at church, I slipped into my usual pew. After the service, a few of the women gathered around, their voices hushed. "Lucille, we're so proud of you," one said. "Standing up for yourself like that." Another added, "You're stronger than most of us." I don't know if I'd have had the courage. I smiled politely, but inside, I thought, strength isn't about shouting the loudest. It's about knowing when to stay quiet and when to reveal what you've held back. That afternoon, Michael came by. He looked thinner, wearier than ever. Rachel hadn't accompanied him. He sat across from me, fiddling with his wedding ring, and finally said, "She's furious, Mom. Not just about the court, but she thinks you're hiding something. Money. Assets." I studied his face. the lines of stress that seemed to have carved themselves deeper in the last months. "And what do you think, Michael?" I asked softly. He hesitated, then sighed. "I think Rachel is obsessed with control, and I think you deserve peace. But I also think she won't stop until she breaks something. Maybe me, maybe you, maybe both." I reached across and placed my hand over his. "Then let her try. But remember this, Michael, I am not helpless. Your father saw to that I didn't tell him about the folder just yet. That was mine to hold a little longer, a quiet shield Rachel could never steal. But for the first time in months, I felt not just defensive, but powerful. Rachel had come after me with insults, with police, with courts. Each time she thought she had me cornered, and each time I had risen. Now I held an even deeper truth, one she didn't know existed, and when the time came, I would decide how to use it. The house wasn't the only thing Rachel couldn't take from me. She couldn't take my past, my dignity, or the future Charles had so carefully tucked into my hands, and that secret, the one she could never touch, would be my strongest weapon yet. Rachel's silence after the court ruling was loud in its own way. Weeks went by without her face at my door, without her sharp voice filling my kitchen. But silence is rarely peace. It's the kind of calm that hangs before a storm, when the air grows heavy and you know thunder is coming. And sure enough, thunder arrived. It was a Friday evening when Michael came by, his face pale, his tie askew. He looked 10 years older than the last time I'd seen him. He dropped onto my sofa and rubbed his temples. "She's leaving," he whispered. I set down my knitting. "Rachel?" He nodded, his eyes red-rimmed. "She packed bags this morning. Took the kids to her mother's. She said she's done. That I failed her. That I let you ruin everything." For a moment, I couldn't breathe. The words landed heavier than I expected, even after all she'd done. Rachel walking out was something I had hoped for in my darker moments, but now that it had happened, all I saw was my son's broken face. "She said I'm weak," he went on, voice raw, "that I should have forced you out, that I chose you over her. She said she can't love a man who won't stand up to his own mother." I swallowed hard. "Michael," he buried his face in his hands. "I loved her, Mom. I thought I did everything right. I worked, I provided, I kept the peace. But it was never enough. Nothing was ever enough." Tears pricked my eyes. I reached over and held his shoulder. "It's not your fault, son. Some people don't want peace. They want control. And when they can't have it, they burn everything down." The days that followed were quiet but heavy. Michael stayed with me for a while, sleeping in his old room like he was a boy again. At night, I heard him pacing the floor, his footsteps restless, his heart too heavy for sleep. One evening, he finally said, "She's filed for separation. She wants the children full time, and she's demanding spousal support." I clenched my hands in my lap. "After everything she's done to you?" He nodded miserably. "She says she sacrificed her life for me. That she deserves compensation." Anger burned in my chest, but I kept my voice even. "Michael, you have to decide how much more of yourself you're willing to give away. A marriage built on threats isn't a marriage. It's a prison." He sat silently for a long time, then whispered, "I don't even recognize her anymore. The woman I married isn't the one packing boxes and calling me a coward." I thought of Charles then, his steady hand, his strong back, his unwavering devotion, and I thought of the vow I had made when we buried him, to protect Michael as best I could, even when he was grown. But protection doesn't always mean shielding. Sometimes it means stepping back and letting the truth burn its way through. The final crack came 2 weeks later. Rachel returned, not to reconcile, but to demand. She stood on my porch, her voice sharp as glass. "You've destroyed my marriage," she hissed. "You poisoned Michael against me." I met her eyes calmly. "I didn't poison anything, Rachel. You did that yourself." Her face twisted. "You'll regret this. You think you've won, but you've only made him weak. Without me, he's nothing. Behind me, Michael's voice broke through, low and steady. That's enough, Rachel. She spun, startled. He stood in the doorway, his shoulders squared for the first time in months. Don't come here again. Not like this. If you want to talk about custody, about separation, we'll do it properly. But don't you dare stand on this porch and insult my mother. For a heartbeat, silence stretched. Then Rachel's lips curled, and she turned on her heel, marching down the steps without another word. When the door closed, Michael leaned against it, his breath shuddering. I think it's really over, he whispered. I touched his arm gently. Then let it be. Sometimes endings are the only way new beginnings can grow. That night, after he'd gone upstairs, I sat in my rocking chair with Charles's mug in my hands. The violets caught the moonlight, their petals trembling in the breeze from the open window. The storm had broken at last. Rachel was gone, her grip shattered. Michael was free, though hurting, and I, though weary, though scarred, felt a strange new peace blooming in the quiet. Rachel had called me a burden, tried to strip me of everything. But in the end, it was she who carried the weight of her own greed until it broke her. And I was still standing. When Rachel finally left for good, I expected the quiet to feel like victory. And in some ways, it did. No more banging on my door, no more whispers about retirement homes, no more schemes dressed up as concern. But once the noise faded, what remained was silence, and silence has a weight of its own. For weeks, the house felt both lighter and lonelier. Michael stayed with me off and on, but eventually he had to return to the small apartment he'd rented near his work. The children came on weekends, their laughter filling the rooms. But when they left, the echoes lingered too long. I'd sit on the porch in the evenings, rocking with Charles's old mug in hand, and think about everything that had happened. The police, the court, the shame, the betrayal. It would have been easy to sink into bitterness, to let Rachel's cruelty harden me. But bitterness never kept a soul alive, and I wasn't about to let mine wither. One Sunday after church, Mrs. Jenkins pulled me aside. "Lucille," she said softly, "you've been through so much. You should share your story. There are women in this town, widows, mothers, who could learn from your strength." At first, I laughed it off. Me? Share my story? I was just a woman who'd clung to her home with stubborn fists. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized maybe that was exactly why I needed to speak. Because too many women my age are told the same things Rachel told me, that we're fragile, that we're burdens, that our worth is behind us. And too many believe it. So I started small. I invited a few women from the congregation over for tea. We sat around my dining table, the same table where Rachel once tried to declare my eviction, and we talked. One woman admitted her son wanted her to sign over her savings for convenience. Another said her daughter had been pressuring her to move out of her home. Tears flowed, voices trembled, but in that room we found something we hadn't realized we were missing: solidarity. By the end of the afternoon, one woman squeezed my hand and whispered, "You've given me courage, Lucille." I don't feel so alone now, word spread. More women came the next week, and the week after that. Soon my living room was filled with chairs pulled from every corner of the house, the air buzzing with stories and laughter and tears. We weren't just talking anymore, we were learning. I brought in David Turner one afternoon, and he explained the importance of wills, deeds, and legal protections. Another week, Pastor Miller spoke about dignity and faith in old age. We even began pooling resources to help widows who struggled with groceries or medical bills. What started as tea became something bigger, a gathering, a community, a quiet movement. Michael noticed the change in me. One evening, as he helped set up folding chairs before a meeting, he said, "Mom, I haven't seen you this alive in years." I smiled, arranging the violets on the windowsill. "Your wife tried to call me a burden, Michael. But look around. Do I look like a burden to you?" He shook his head, tears brimming in his eyes. "No, Mom. "You look like the strongest person I know." It wasn't about revenge on Rachel anymore. It wasn't even about the house. It was about legacy, the kind you build not with money or property, but with courage and love. Rachel had tried to strip me of my dignity. Instead, she'd lit a fire I hadn't known I still carried, and now that fire was warming others. I began to think of Charles often, wondering what he would say if he could see me now, standing not just for myself, but for others. I imagined his chuckle, his proud smile, the way he'd squeeze my hand and say, "That's my Lucille," always stronger than she looks, and maybe, just maybe, he'd be right. The house that Rachel had once measured for profit had become a refuge again, but this time not just for me. For every woman who stepped through my door, it was proof that we were more than society's dismissals, proof that we were not fragile, not expendable, not burdens. We were still standing. When I look back on it now, I can hardly believe how far things spiraled, all from one cruel word, burden. A single word can change the course of a life if you let it. Rachel thought that word would weaken me, that it would push me out quietly like dust brushed off a shelf. Instead, it became the spark that lit every defense I had left inside me. The police call, the courtroom, the shame, it all feels like a storm that passed, leaving the air clearer than before. Rachel is gone now, living her own life far from mine. Michael still struggles picking up the pieces of a marriage that fractured beyond repair, but I see in him a strength that wasn't there before. Sometimes it takes fire to harden steel. As for me, I sit here in this house, my house, surrounded by the echoes of a life well lived. Charles's mug still waits on the kitchen shelf. The violets on the windowsill still bloom with each season. And now, the rooms that once felt heavy with conflict ring with laughter again. Laughter from the women who gather here, sharing stories, finding courage, refusing to be erased. Do I still hurt? Of course. Betrayal cuts deep, especially when it comes from family. Some nights I lie awake wondering if there was something I could have done differently, some word I could have said that might have softened Rachel's heart. But the truth is, you can't twist yourself into someone else's idea of usefulness. You can't make someone see your worth if they're determined to be blind to it. And that's the lesson I hope anyone listening takes away. Your value isn't measured by someone else's convenience. It isn't tied to your age, your income, or whether you can climb a flight of stairs without stopping. Your value is in the life you've lived, the love you've given, the strength you carry, even when the world calls you weak. Sometimes I wonder what Charles would say if he were here. I think he'd shake his head at all the chaos, chuckle in that way he used to, and tell me I handled it just fine. He always did believe in me, even when I doubted myself. And now, sitting in the home we built together, I feel him here in every creak of the floorboards, every breeze through the curtains. I like to think he's proud. The women who come here now often ask me, "Lucille, how did you do it? How did you stand your ground without breaking?" And I tell them the truth. I didn't do it alone. I had Charles's memory, Michael's quiet love, even if he struggled to show it, and a community that reminded me I wasn't invisible. Strength isn't about never bending. It's about bending and refusing to snap. If Rachel thought I'd be erased, she gave me the greatest gift instead, the chance to prove I could not be. So here I am at 72 years old telling you my story. Not because I want pity, but because I want someone out there, maybe you, to remember this. You are not a burden. You are not disposable. You are not done. If someone tries to convince you otherwise, stand firm. Plant your roots deep. And if you need to, remind them, as I reminded Rachel, that dignity doesn't fade with age. It only deepens. And now, I'll turn it back to you. Where are you listening from? What stories do you carry that the world has tried to silence? Share them with me. Share them with us. Because when we speak, when we stand, we remind the world and ourselves that we are still here, still strong, still worthy, still standing. That is the end of my story, but not the end of me.